I did learn is that the beer had to be brewed a certain way, in a special way. I also was born in Russia. I was born in 1831. And when I turned 21, I got married, but my wife and our baby died in childbirth. So I was left alone. I decided that I was going to sell everything that I had. I was going to get on a steamer and head off to the United States.
I am William C. Schellhas, and in Winona, my name is synonymous with the brewing industry. Back in the day, local breweries produced beer in kegs, and they sold it to local saloons, which is why people drink out of steins instead of bottles.
Wow.
Prost! I was born in 1856 in Michigan to German immigrants. When my father died when I was 16 years old, and I decided to become a brewer. I apprenticed in Michigan, and then in Chicago, and then in Milwaukee. It took a good deal of time because brewing beer is a very complicated art. In 1875, I moved to Winona, Minnesota, where I met this enchanting young Fraulein named Miss Augusta Wellnitz, and now she is Frau Schellhas.
William and I married in February 1882.
Yeah, once in America, I decided that I was going to settle in Rock Island, Illinois, and I got employment at, guess what? A brewery. Well, a couple of years later, I also met and married a fellow German, Margaret Litty.
Hello, dear Jacob.
You notice that Margaret isn't buried with me. She's over at St. Mary's Cemetery, and we'll explain more about that later.
Hello, William. Augusta.
Well, hello, Margaret. We were just making some introductions here. Why don't you tell these folks here how it was that you came to Winona?
Well, I was born in Rock Island, and my mother died when I was only a few months old. I left the house when I was 15 because my father's third wife was very abusive. I took up sewing at the neighbor's shop to get out of the house.
And her specialty was making pleated front shirts for men, and that's how I met her.
My father urged me to marry Jacob by giving me a $2,000 dowry, which today would be about $80,000. In 1856, Jacob and I came to Winona.
Did you know that the first white settlers actually called this place Montezuma?
That's right. And remember when the steamboats used to travel alongside the Minnesota Bluffs, which was now Lake Winona? We used to love watching them travel when the water was high.
Yes, when we got here, there was already one small brewery that had been established. It's where the campus of St. Mary's University is today, known as the Gilmore Valley Brewery, directed by a C.C. Beck, and they produced about 600 barrels of beer a year.
Making beer requires malt, barley, hops, rosin, fresh spring water, wood, and Germans.
Yes, and I considered us very fortunate that we had secured land that was tillable and close to spring water.
Winona farmers also produced a lot of these crops, and the bluffs provided caves where we stored the barrels of beer.
So I decided to open up my own brewery in East Burns Valley. Meanwhile, Margaret and I had 6 children. Well, in a couple of years, I had to expand and put in new equipment in the brewery to keep up with the growing needs and thirsts of our community.
It was located on the city side of Sugarloaf. Ours was the first beer brewed at this location.
7 years later, I hired Peter Boob, a Bavarian immigrant who worked at the Best Brewing Company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He came here, became the foreman and the brewmaster for our Sugarloaf facility. And once he arrived, business really started booming. Unfortunately, I passed away in 1871 after having contracted typhoid fever.
When Augusta and I got married, I took a job at the Becker Brewery on the other side of Sugarloaf. In 1890, however, we bought that brewery, and we had a 4-acre plant. We had a 600-foot deep artesian well, and we had plenty of caves to store and cool our beer. Our 3 top sellers were Gold Medal Beer, Old Private Stock, and Pale Bohemian. Sold a lot of that, and we hired a lot of Germans to help us brew the beer. We even sponsored a baseball team.
You know, speaking of baseball, William and I had 9 children. 2 of our daughters, Caroline and Maria, died as babies.
And a lot of our children worked in the family business. In fact, my 3 sons, William, Walter, and Kurt, all became brewmasters.
And our daughter Margaret worked in the office. Our home was located right by the brewery. William used to come home for lunch every day.
You would too. In 1907, we incorporated our business.
William was president.
But I wasn't president for very long because I died of pneumonia in May of 1907. Our son William J. took over.
After William J. passed away, our son Walter became president and managed the brewery for a short time until he too died in 1912. He was only 25. Kurt was secretary and I was treasurer. 2 years later, I was also president of the company.
Well, after losing Jacob, I hired Peter Boob to run the brewery. A year later, I married him. Well, unfortunately, a year after that, the plant burned by fire. So, Peter built a state-of-the-art brewery and a house using the limestone quarried from Sugarloaf. He changed the name to Peter Boob Sugarloaf Brewery. When he passed away in 1911, William Miller, who had married our daughter Lena, came in and ran the company.
In 1920, Congress passed the 18th Amendment to the Constitution. This amendment prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages, known as Prohibition.
Under the orders of the United States government, Park Brewing Company, housed alongside the river, emptied over 2,200 barrels of beer into the sewers, allowing it to flow into the Mississippi River.
John Dietz, the president of Park Brewery, said that was $15,000 worth of beer. That's $250,000 today, folks.
Most local breweries closed their doors forever. In fact, breweries all over the country didn't survive.
William Miller deserves an enormous amount of credit for having shepherded the Boob's Brewing Company through Prohibition. In fact, we were the only brewing establishment in the city that survived.
Because Boob's also provided soft drinks and alcohol-free beer, and installed modern bottling equipment for the new products and expanding markets.
And you see, Jacob, that's when they quit drinking beer out of steins.
William, you were not even here during Prohibition.
Jacob, neither were you.
I think it's time to wrap things up so Margaret can get back to Peter over at St. Mary's Cemetery. But you know, the lead to her epitaph has a really nice description of how she left behind 21 grandchildren and 39 great-grandchildren.
And some of them were yours.
Oh, a couple. But, you know, one of the things that was great is the way they worked together to keep Boobs open until they finally closed in 1969. And let's give them a big toast.
Zumbo!
To your health!
Thank you.